Alright, on this video we are working on a 94 Pathfinder. I'm using the 97 Nissan pickup motor and transmission. This is air ride. It is stock floor body dropped, and we are going to fit the engine and fit the cross member for the carrier bearing, build a drive shaft, and put a parking brake cable in, and some little things like that. So alright, let's get started here. Alright, I'm fitting the engine and transmission into the frame, and the aftermarket header is hitting this aftermarket tube that I put on the lower control arm. So I am going to cut that tube off of this header and go from there. Alright, so now I still can't get the motor on because the header is now hitting on the bracket. I'm going to cut the bracket down just a little bit and see if I can clear the header with it. Alright, so before 8 years ago, whenever I built this frame, I built the frame to have a lower engine. So I don't know how many inches, but it's lowered quite a bit, and it's probably too much. I've done that before and it worked fine, but I had to cut my oil pan down, and I really don't want to do that. I really kind of want to leave the oil pan factory. It poses other issues, other problems. I really don't want to get into all of that issue. And I had to take the cross member off. So what I might do is jack this up, put the cross member under, and see how far I have to go in order to clear that cross member. And it may not clear at all without going back to factory spec. I can look at another truck, honestly. So I think I'm just going to do that. I took this styrofoam out. This is 3 inches tall. And I did a 2.5 inch stock floor body drop. So I set this on the breather of my youngest daughter's truck, and it's a Hardbody 97, and it squished that. So I know that's 3 inches and I only need 2.5, and I do know that her hood has all of the braces under it. So I'm just gonna attempt to lift this motor the height that I need it lifted, and see if I can put this cross member back underneath the oil pan and go from there with it. Alright guys, I went to work for a couple days and I feel a lot better. I just was getting kind of burnt out. Nothing was working, and I was just out here like beating my head against a wall. So I just took a small break and I feel a lot better. But I don't know what I was thinking whenever I lowered this motor so far. It's gonna have to go back up. So I think what I'm going to do is, what I did is I measured this cross member on my daughter's truck to the oil pan, the bottom of the oil pan, the lowest point. It's right there at the drain. I got 3/4 of an inch, so I know I could drop the engine 3/4 of an inch and the oil pan would be basically touching the ground. You don't want that. So with a skid plate, I can do maybe 1/4 of an inch off the ground and add a skid plate to this cross member. Maybe do a notch removal for the oil drain, and I think that will be good. So I'm going to take these back up to 1/2 an inch lower than stock. So I'll just remove this and then re-weld it roughly here, 1/2 inch lower than stock, and we'll see if I can clear the hood with that. We'll just hope and pray, I guess. And the drive shaft, that one I've not tried again, but this morning I did find this one out in my building, it's going to be for an extended cab, but it unbolts right here at the U-joint. I'm going to replace all this stuff, the U-joints, the carrier bearing, all that, so that I know it's good and I don't have to remove it once it's all put together. But I was able to clean this one up and it goes in, so I assume I should be able to get that one at this point to fit as well. And this one I found out in my building, and it has a bolt flange instead of U-joints. So they made several different styles, I suppose. Alright guys, I got my engine fitted back in. It is sitting 1/2 inch lower than factory with the new mount positions. And I've got those welded back in solid. And just as I thought, my oil pan is sitting 1/8 inch off the ground. My pinion angle is fairly close. The top of this, I've realized in the past that this is flush with the crank, so it is the same angle as the crank. So I'm just going to get my pinion angle off of this. I'm going to try to drop 2 degrees coming back. I'm going to go ahead first and mount the rear transmission mount. I'm going to modify a factory one and modify what I've already got going on here for the S14. I'm going to take that back out. This is the hardbody truck transmission now, so modify that, get a transmission bracket and mount, and then I can look at pinion angles on the drive shaft. And once I figure out with a 2-piece drive shaft what my pinion angle needs to be able to get back here at ride height, try to get it correct at ride height. And I'll also have to do something about this drive shaft. This is it looks like an extended cab 2-wheel drive 4-cylinder truck, so it slides in good. And what I've done is I've slid it in and then pulled it back out about 1.25 inches to get it to where it's sitting here, and then I can mount a cross member here to get the carrier bearing mount with the correct pinion angle. The pinion angle will be where I set this at, will be the angle. So that's what that is, in case you didn't know. And once that is fitted, I took a measurement from center here to where this bolts, and I have 17 inches. And the drive shaft that I thought I was going to be able to use is only 16 inches. I don't know why. This might have been a V6. It might have been out of a truck and the Pathfinder is different. I'm not really sure. But that one is not right at all. That's not going to work. That's only 15 inches. So I'm not sure what I've got going on with the drive shafts. But the simplest solution is to just cut this one down. So I will either take this to a shop or possibly do it here. I'm tempted just to do it here. And you have to cut perfect. It has to be perfect. And then perfectly straight. And then you will grind that end off and fit it into where your new end is. Clean it up, taper the edge so you get a good nice weld. And your weld has to be really clean all the way around. No blobs, no skipped spots, because it needs to be balanced best you can make it. And also your pivot points have to be exact as well. You can't have this one sitting here and the other side sitting anywhere else. It has to be exactly straight in line, or it will buck you like a bucking horse or whatever. So right, I'm going to get started building this. I just want to say something real quick, because I've had what's supposed to have been a good, well-known builder. I never heard of him, but he was talking about one of my builds one time about the carrier bearing placement was not center, and I basically just ignored him. I quit talking to him. He obviously didn't know what he was talking about, because the factory is not center. If you measure from one side, measure the other side, it's not going to be factory centered. So whatever, I'm just a guy in my backyard, but dude was telling me wrong, and everybody was listening to him. So whatever, it is what it is. So you can listen to whoever you want, but this doesn't, it's not supposed to be centered. So what I'm going to do, you can look down and just check out your Driveline. And so I'm lining my drive shaft up. I'm trying to line my transmission up. I will possibly go and get measurements off of another vehicle if I need to, but that is not equal to that. It's pretty simple to see. So it is what it is. So there's that. Here's Skyline. Hey, Skyline. What's up?
He's a shot dog. Look.
Yeah. Run. Do your little run. It's too crowded. He can't do it.
Here he goes. He's making his way.
You gonna do it? He got distracted. He's got ADHD. So I've got another transmission mount, but it's for a four-wheel drive or a V6 or something. It doesn't fit. It's too big for this. So that one's busted, and I thought I was good to go, but I'm not. So anyway, I used 1.5 inch square tubing with a 3/16 wall, and I used angle iron here, and I bolted it in to this plate that I already had, and I will just gusset this and make it stronger while leaving room for the exhaust to travel through. And there's my exhaust cut out in the back, so I will have most of this room for a muffler. I'll have another cross member here. You have to keep things in mind like that exhaust as you're building. So I've got the pinion angle set to about 2.5 degrees on the motor and transmission, and it drops down. And this, I'm probably going to set it to about a 3 degree just to try to keep my transmission tunnel a little bit smaller. It appears that I'm already gonna be into my transmission tunnel, so I'm gonna have to cut the floor of the Pathfinder and raise it right there, and probably hit the bar here, but that's fine. So I'm gonna have to cut the drive shaft and figure out what I'm gonna have here. It looks like it's gonna be around 6 or 7 degrees on this way back up, and this is set at a pretty low ride height, which honestly that's where we'll be anyway, about 3.5 inches off the ground, which is where I would probably drive it if I end up keeping this. If I don't get the offer that I want, then I will probably drive it about 3.5 inches, because that's just the coolest way to ride. Alright, so it's a new day. I came out here and I started drilling some angle iron. So what I've got here is some 2 inch by 2 inch angle. I drilled a 1/2 inch hole, and I have a metric 12 with a 1.75 thread. What I'm going to do is weld the nuts on the back side here, and that will be my bolt point for the carrier bearing mount. I have this tube here. This is 1/8 inch thick. It is probably 1 by 2. So what I might end up doing is cutting a piece and angling it down, and then cutting another piece and coming straight over, and then attaching to my rail here, and then I can make gussets whatever I want to on the sides. So, and the gussets can be shaped like anything you want, so it can be pretty and artistic however you want. Of course, it's the frame, and it's even on the inside of the frame, So whenever somebody puts this on a lift to look at it, they'll say, why in the world did somebody spend so much time on these gussets under here? So anyway, that's that. I could probably mount that there and then just have a gusset coming down, which would still be fine, but it's still not going to get me really where I need to be. So anyway, that's what I'm looking at doing right now, and I will let you know whenever I quit playing with this and decide what I'm going to do. Alright. So I decided to set this drive shaft, the first one, up to a 4-degree drop, and then I set this up with the angle iron that I've showed you previously. I've still got to weld these nuts on so it'd be easier to remove. And I used this bar that I showed you. I didn't end up having to bend it anywhere, so it's just a solid bar with angled ends. And then I put some angle iron here. That's 3/4 inch angle. And you can stand on that and bounce. It's not moving, so should be good to go. I've went ahead and bolted on this exhaust piece, and it comes out at a funny angle right here. So what I'm going to do is cut it right up in here, and I'll just use this and then come into a muffler. I'll measure and maybe use a secondary, like a resonator right here, and then have a tip back here. I'm probably not going to be able to go over the rear axle, so we'll figure that out as we go. And then these, I've got to get a piece out of my parts truck. I figured out what's going on with that. These two connect, but there is definitely pieces that I'm missing, so I'll have to make brackets to attach the missing pieces, so I'll figure that out later. And then most people just use their frame as the parking brake on these vehicles anyway. I'm gonna have to cut quite a bit out of this second drive shaft and put this in place here, so it's maybe a foot or so. I'm probably gonna cut it off this back end because this is a smaller weight. I've got a larger weight on the other end somewhere. It's on the bottom side. And so I will just grind this loose and then cut the tube down and keep cutting it and try to keep it perfectly straight and square until everything fits together like it should. So I've got, that's the wiggle room for whenever you travel up and down. My 4-link bars are longer, so I'm not going to have a whole lot of travel with that drive shaft. It's not going to move much because my long bars there. If you had shorter bars, your axle would go forward and backward more than with the longer bars that I've got. So we'll see what I can do with this drive shaft. Alright, so I just ground down the weld until I found where the metal was, and I peeled off the old metal once the weld was found, and that was kind of a big deal because I didn't want to mess this up or this edge up, and that slides up over that. It's kind of a big deal. Very, very hard to do and get precise. So hopefully that is precise enough. And then I took my drive shaft and stuck it in this end, and I marked roughly where it needed to be. So I'm going to clean this edge right here up and try to get it as straight as I can. So the inside mainly. There's a piece of cardboard in here. I don't know, it's weird. But so I'm going to clean this inside edge up so it'll slide over that, and try to get some of these burrs off. And we'll see where we're at. I cut it just a hair too long so that I'm able to clean this up and still have plenty left. Alright, so it appears to fit really good. All I got to do now is figure out how to get it exactly in line and then tack weld it and then weld it all the way around. Everything's fitted together. It pulled back just a hair further than what I wanted, but it'll be perfectly fine. It still has plenty of splines in there. This is the extra that I had. I might should have left another 1/8 of an inch, but it's not going to hurt anything where it's at. So I'm going to there's a piece of ice that fell off my roof. Alright, so I'm about 6 degrees right here, coming back up, and that's at a low ride height still. And I'm going to hit this at a higher ride height, which is fine. I'm just going to notch that out, and I can even plate the bottom side with something if I need to. This right here fits up real nice. So at this point, I'm going to take it all back apart, and I'm going to lay it in the floor, and I will put this on the concrete and that on the concrete, line them up, and then start tack welding and see how true it is before I fully weld it. That's where we'll go with it. Alright, so I have got it tack welded in place, and it looks straight. Everything looks good. So I'm going to wire brush this, and then I'm going to make sure that the end of my welder is clean. Make sure all my settings are right, and then I'm going to weld this and try to spin it as I weld it. I may jack the vehicle up so that I can spin this as I weld it while it's connected to that. That might be the best way to do this. I want to make sure the weld is uniform and welded solid, not double welded, no anything special anywhere different, you know what I mean? So it's perfectly in balance. Alright, so I'm gonna attempt to do this. Alright, I got it all welded up. It's not my best weld I've ever done. I decided to use a chain so that I could ground through the chain and spin the drive shaft. It worked out okay. It wasn't perfect, but trying to spin the tire as I welded and not wrapping up that chain and keeping it grounded, fighting all of that at once, it's not the best weld, but it should be fine. We will go ahead. My welder kicked off, so I don't have to scream now maybe. So at this point, I'm gonna call that good. I think all I need now is some U-joints and a carrier bearing to wrap this part of it up. Oh, I will also need a transmission mount, and I am going to go ahead and put new motor mounts in, but not until after paint. And I'm going to put some shock absorbers in right now, but I don't have my last video edited. It's harder for me to shoot these videos than it is for me to build. So what I've done is I took some aluminum wire that I've got. It's probably like some kind of electrical wire for maybe a trailer or something. Somebody gave it to me at work to hang things as I paint. What I did is I've wrapped that around to hold this shock absorber closed all the way. It's actually about 1/4 to 1/4 of an inch open, but it's for the most part shut. But if I leave it like this and just fit it, then I know that I've got just a hair of slack, so my shock won't bottom out unless I'm sitting on some kind of weird ground, which you know you will be, because the earth is not flat. Some people might think it is, but so let's go on here. So I've got a parts truck sitting in front of my shop now, and I'm going to be working with it and this frame to try to get everything lined out. So since it was sitting there super handy, I went ahead and looked. This lower control arm is modified. So I have a tube hoop coming off, and this is coming off of the back side of the frame. The pivot point matches the factory pivot point with a bolt. So I'm going to be attaching to that hoop. You can maybe see it better on this side, just like that. But I wanted to turn my wheel all the way to one direction and know that I'm going to be able to clear this shock absorber. So if I get this shock absorber 1/2 inch from the ground and attach a 12mm bolt, this is a 4-wheel drive hard body front shock, by the way, like a 97, 95, 97, just a 4-wheel drive, probably a 4-cylinder, because you want the smallest shock you can possibly get, and that one is. So I'm going to attach that bolt to the bottom of that tube, and then I will come up right behind where my rubber line attaches, and I'll fit a bracket that I'll have to make onto the frame right here to hold the stem, and that will be roughly 4 inches taller than the top of the frame. And I went to my parts truck, and I have about 4 3/4 roughly. So, and the body starts right around in here. So I have to stay in front of that body. I have to stay below the body here. I have to stay away from that, and I have to stay away from the tire. So this is the only place that I can possibly put this shock absorber and it work. So I'm going to make a bracket and fit that bolt to the bottom side of that hoop, and I'm going to try to get the shock absorber close to the ground but not touching the ground. And then I will look at the top bracket. I'm going to make that maybe out of angle iron and some flat steel, and drill a hole and make it to where I can weld it to the side of the frame. And then I'll check my travel, make sure that I'm good on the height whenever I raise this. So let's get to building. So this is a roughed in bracket, of course. I welded the bolt right here on the tube, just tack welded it, and I built this. This is just a piece of angle iron. I tack welded it here. I built this to see about the travel, and yeah, it doesn't look good, but it doesn't have to yet, so not a big deal. But the first time I put it on and raised the truck, and it looks like it's going to work. Everything clears, no rubbing anywhere. So the tire gets real close when turned, but it gets close to the bag too, so I'm just going to make a stop and have it stop before it gets close to the bag, and the tire will get close to the shock, so I'll just stop it. There is originally stops on here anyway, and mine are broke, so I'm just going to modify that to where it'll work at all heights and get it to where it will stop where it needs to. So I'll take care of that with that. Everything's looking good so far. I'm going to go ahead and build another set of these to go to the other side and get the travel right, and then clean these up, make them look better. And I will finish all of that up. I'll brace this in and make it to where the shock can't go any further back before I paint these lower control arms. I can do that off of the vehicle. It's not a big deal. I'll probably cut this at an angle down, make it prettier. Trim that edge off, weld it up solid. Alright, so I finished up the parking brake. I've got a little tab right here for the spring to fit. The spring will release all the pressure and keep your parking brake from being locked up. This arm now reaches right where the cable should attach to that. That should be good to go. I've got this arm welded in on the top side. I'm gonna have to flip the frame over and finish building everything underneath. I started going ahead and gusseting this. So I think at this point the only thing I've got left to do is clearance for the drive shaft right here. I'm going to raise the frame and see what I need to do here. I'll probably just end up having to put a notch right here, but other than that I think we're done. And I've got to do a whole lot of cleaning and some gussets to build in, so pull everything off and wire brush this whole frame, clean it up, get it ready for paint. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop this video here, and hopefully you've liked it. Like or subscribe or whatever you want to do, don't matter. So all right, hope you enjoyed. Talk to you later.